Cameras are one of those elements that you don't really realize you're missing it until you see a scene that doesn't have a camera setup. So here's a recording I did of these two characters, Lyndon and Robot, singing a song, but it's just staying on one shot. And after a few seconds, this kind of gets boring. And for the world of online video, you're making an animated cartoon and it's staying in one shot for 30 seconds. People are going to click away really fast. So compare that to this instead, where we start with a wide shot, then we immediately switch to a closer up shot. We can see a little bit more details of the characters there. We now move back to a wider shot. Now we'll move to a more focused shot of just the Lyndon character, and then maybe pan over to show the robot playing the keyboard there, and then a zoomed out shot to get back to kind of the full scene, and then maybe just end with zooming back in. So that's the same 30 seconds of animation, but this second one is much more compelling because it changes the camera. It's the same animation happening, beneath everything, but the camera changes are what make it visually interesting and diverse and keeps the viewer's attention throughout the whole animated piece. Now, up until this point, Character Animator has not had a dedicated camera system built into the app. And so for any camera changes like we just saw, you would probably want to do that stuff in After Effects or try to hack some sort of transform behavior camera system. It never really worked as well as you wanted it to. But now you'll notice down here in the timeline, I do have something called Camera 1. And I see that I can keyframe this camera to have all these different changes, whether it's holding a shot or zooming or panning or whatever it's doing, giving me full control, precise frame-by-frame control over a dedicated camera system. It's really easy to add a camera. All you have to do is go up to Scene, New Scene Camera, and that's all it takes. And it will add a camera into your timeline. But what makes cameras even better in Character Animator is that there's also the live aspect of Character Animator, and you can actually trigger cameras, just like you can trigger audio and layers and animations and all of that stuff. So you'll notice here with my camera, I have a triggerable shots swap set. And so 1 is a wide shot, 2, if I press the 2 key, I'm now to a close-up, 3 is going to be more focused on Lyndon, 4 is going to be more focused on the robot, 5 is going to do a zoom in, a slow about 2-second zoom into the character, 6 is going to zoom slowly back, and then 7 is going to do a pan. Now, all of these are on-demand triggers that I have either for recorded stuff or most likely for live performances. So when I press these keys, I'm going to do them, in any order I want on demand at any time. So that's what we're going to cover in this tutorial. We're going to start out with how to set up a camera track for a recorded piece. So how to set up these different hold shots and pans and zooms and all of that. Then we're going to move into the trigger system over here and how to set up these different triggers that I can press to do zooms in and out and pans and close-ups and wide shots and all of that. And then finally, I'll just add a few extra tips and tricks for making your camera system a little more compelling. And that includes, you'll notice if you looked really closely, that I also had some stuff in the background and foreground keyframes. So as I'm moving between these different views, I kind of get a small sense of parallax from the trees moving and the background moving. It's subtle, but it's a small detail, and we'll cover that at the end as well. To follow along, please download the project that's in the video description below. It's called Lyndon and Robot. It's on the official Adobe Character Animator examples page, and we'll walk through the steps using this project. So just open it up, and you should see exactly what I'm seeing here. By the way, you're free to use these characters and scene however you want. So if you want to take this background out or just use the robot for one of your projects, you can totally do that as well. Okay, to start out, I'm going to double click on Scene, Test Scene, Empty Timeline. And that's just going to give me a basic scene that just has Lyndon and the robot in the street. Now, if I wanted to record one of these characters, I would just select it. And now I'm controlling Lyndon or robot. Now I'm controlling him. Or if I select both of them at the same time, now I'm controlling both of them simultaneously. But instead, what I want to do is add a camera. So I'm going to disarm both of these guys, and I'm going to go, as I showed earlier, to Scene, New Scene Camera. Okay, so that is going to create a new camera track in my timeline. And just like when I select a character in my timeline and I see the behaviors and everything show up here on the right, when I select a camera, I see the camera properties showing up here on the right. So let's walk through these and see what they all do. Mouse and touch input, if I do a red dot here, if I click it to arm it, then I'm going to be able to click with my mouse or fingers if you're on a touch-enabled device like a Surface or something like that, and drag the scene around. I can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out as well. So this is a really nice way to, very quickly create shots. And if you're recording kind of a fast and dirty process, I think this works really well. So I could set this shot, click record, and it's going to do the countdown. And okay, that's a good shot to start off with. Maybe I want to record it, though, zooming out a little bit. So I'll use the scroll wheel. I'll zoom something like that, click and drag a little bit, and that looks pretty good. And stop recording. And now I have a recorded sequence. Let's get rid of that audio track and just go through this. And you can see whatever I did right there is recorded. Directly under that is a smoothing parameter. By default, this is set to 15, but let's bump this up to 100 just to show what it does. So now as I'm clicking and dragging, there's a little bit of a delay. There's a little bit of a smoothness that's happening with the zooming and the panning. So it's not as one-to-one as you immediately do it. It's going to be, immediately responsive. There's a little bit of a delay just to add a little bit of smoothness, which typically is going to look a little better in this sort of stuff. It's not going to be as jittery as you saw me doing before. So typically, if I'm going to be doing this, I'll probably fool around with the smoothness a little bit. But for me, most of the time, I haven't been using mouse and touch input that much. It is a nice feature to have, and you can totally use it if you feel comfortable with that and you want to record performances like that. But for now, I primarily focus on these three right here: position X, position Y, and zoom. Rotation is great, but rotation doesn't show up in camera shots as much as some other stuff. If you're doing like a shaky cam or something like that, that would be okay, or a Dutch angle or certain techniques. But for a lot of my shots, I'm just doing straight on and position X, Y, and zoom. That's all I need. All right, so I'm gonna delete that recording that I just did and instead focus on keyframing some of these parameters. So I've got position X, Y, and zoom. So let's say this wide shot is how I want to start. I want to be a nice establishing shot and just show everything in all its glory. So let's say I'm going to start all the way here at 0, and next to position X, I'll click this stopwatch icon, position Y, and zoom, all of these. And normally when I'm setting my keyframes, I'm going to click all three of these because I never know if I want to make subtle changes here and there. Most likely, I'm going to be changing all three of these with each shot, but your mileage may vary. So if I zoom in here, I'll see that I've got my 3 keyframes right here. And normally, if I'm just doing jump cuts, so if I'm just going from one shot to the next, the easiest way to do that is to turn these into hold keyframes. And that just means it's going to hold in one position until it sees another keyframe. And to do that, I'm going to select all of these, drag and select all 3 of these, right-click them, and go to toggle hold keyframe. And the keyframe symbol is going to change here to show a little hold icon. And so now when I go to, let's say 2 seconds, and I want to change this, it's really easy. I can say, let's say I want to do a close-up now. So I'll just click and drag to make my zoom a little closer. Let's move position Y, something like that, and position X over like that. All right, so if I play this back, it's going to start with the wide shot, and then when it hits that second set of hold keyframes, it's going to immediately jump to that, that close-up shot. Honestly, what I'm just showed you right here is what's going to work for most of your shots. This is a really basic camera setup, and a lot of times with cartoons, it's just wide, medium, close, and that's a lot of the shots that they're doing. So just do that. So let's say I want to change to a medium shot now. I go to 4 seconds. I'm going to make it zoom out a little bit. Maybe I change position Y and X and something like that. That looks pretty good. Now I've got a new set of keyframes. And so as I play it back again, it's going to change from one shot to the next like that. But sometimes you're going to want to do pans and zooms and other things like that. So let's start with a simple zoom. Let me copy my keyframes from the beginning here. So I'm just going to marquee select them there and press Command C on Mac, Control C on Windows. And then at about 6 seconds, I'm going to press Command V to paste those keyframes into place. Now, I don't want these to be hold keyframes. Instead, I want these to be just regular keyframes. I'm going to want them to ease most likely. So with these keyframes selected, I'm going to right-click them and go to ease. All right, so I've got my new set of 3 keyframes here. And let's say over the course of 2 seconds, I wanted to do a slow zoom in. So what would I do? I would just go up to zoom here, click, and something like that, and drag, and position X. Just move everything to exactly what I want. And as I change these values, it's going to automatically add the keyframes down here. And so now, Character Animator is going to put those in between steps. And so the zoom is going to be something like that. And then let's say I wanted to do a pan. So let's do something like this where I'm adding some keyframes here. Let's make the previous ones held keyframes because I kind of want to hold this shot until I get to what I'm going to be doing with panning. So let's zoom in a little closer. Let's move over to the left a little bit, something like that. And then go down the timeline a couple of seconds and then just move position X wrong way, this way. And maybe I think position Y can stay and zoom can stay. That's okay. Okay, so now what's going to happen is after that last zoom, it's going to move to a pan shot like that. So the way the timeline looks down here is pretty typical of what I think a character animator camera system is going to look like. You are going to be keyframing, your different X, Y, and zooms, and you're going to be doing hold keyframes if you're just doing quick jump cuts from one medium or wide or close-up shot to the next, or you're going to be doing eased keyframes if you're moving between, a zoom or a pan or something like that. And you can mix the two together as much as you want. You could add rotation in, you could do all sorts of crazy stuff. Rotation, by the way, is also keyframeable. So that's just another parameter. If I wanted, things to flip around and turn upside down, I could do that. And then that's going to happen over, the course of time as well. So my advice would be at a bare minimum, do something like this. I have hold keyframes for my wide shot for 5 seconds and then moves to a close-up shot. And as long as you have two characters talking or one character talking or whatever, and this is their scene, something like this could work pretty well, where I just select all of these and copy them, Command-C on Mac, Control-C on Windows, and then paste, and kind of go every 5 seconds doing a camera change. Now, obviously, depending on the scene and what's being said, camera changes might make more sense at one time or another when the dialogue begins or ends or when a certain character is reacting to something. So, you can kind of finesse this and fool around with it. But at the very least, set up some basic camera changes and then copy and paste them throughout. And then you can kind of move these keyframes around if you say, I want this to happen a little bit earlier or this shot to be a little later, something like that. And that is a good first setup for creating a camera system for your scene. All right, so now that we've covered how to add keyframe shots in the timeline, let's move over to adding triggered shots instead. So I'm gonna get rid of all my existing keyframes just by clicking the stopwatch icons over here, and that's going to give me a blank timeline yet again. So really easy to create a triggerable shot. All you have to do is click this little button at the bottom, and whatever values are showing up here is what's going to be put into that shot. So right now I've got my basic wide shot with just all these default settings. That's actually a pretty good shot to start with. So I'm just going to click create triggerable shot. And that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to create a replay of that shot down here. Now, nothing is going to change when I press play because I'm already in this position. And then over here, I'm going to get a auto-created swap set. Remember, a swap set is only going to show one trigger at a time. And for camera shots, that's what you want. You don't want shots competing with each other and trying to show 2 or 3 at the same time. You only want one at a time. So it's going to automatically create this folder called triggerable shots, this swap set, I should say, called triggerable shots, and put your first shot in there. Now, most of the time when I'm creating shots, I want to rename them to something that makes sense. So I'm going to select it, press enter, and let's just call this wide. And let's just set that to the 1 key for now. Okay, so we're starting with that. Now let's move into more of a close-up shot. So I'm just going to go to zoom here. Let's zoom in a little bit. I think I'm also going to move the position and X just a little bit to get that exactly where I want it. And that is looking pretty good. Okay, so now with this new shot, I'm going to click create triggerable shot, and that is going to do the exact same thing. Add a second shot down here and the replays, and then add a new shot over here in my swap set. So let's again press enter. Let's call this close up, and we will set this to 2 and press enter. Okay, so now I have a really basic camera setup. This is as bare bones simple as it can get, right? So when I press 1, I'm going to go back to the wide shot, and now when I press 2, I'm going to go to the close-up, and I can do this as many times as I want. Now, if you prefer, this is where you can also use the mouse and touch input. So if I arm mouse and touch input, let's say I want to do a close-up shot of Lyndon, I'm going to move it over here, something like this, and that's all you have to do. And then you click create triggerable shot, and it's going to add a new shot there. Let's do the same thing. For the robot, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here with him, create triggerable shot, and just like that, I've created 2 more replays and 2 more shots. So I'm going to rename these as I want. And there we go. So now I have a 4-shot system. When I press 1, I've got the wide shot, 2 is the close-up, 3 is Lyndon, and 4 is the robot. Now, 2 things to note here. Number 1, the characters aren't moving right now, and that's because they're not armed. But if I wanted one character or both characters to be armed, I could do that. And now when I press 1, 2, 3, 4, it's doing all of them. But notice, because I have the other characters armed, those camera triggers, if I press 1, for example, notice that's changing the eyes of both of those characters as well. And 2 and 3, they're all doing different things because these characters also are using the same trigger keys. So if you are going to have a live camera setup like this, and you're going to be arming multiple characters, the camera and a character or two, what I would say is put your camera triggers on separate keys than you are with the actual characters. And if you use an external MIDI device or something like that, it's totally fine. Don't worry about this because you have plenty of MIDI keys. I might say I'm going to reserve the 1 through 5 keys for my camera shots, and then in Lyndon and Robot make their triggers slightly different. So it's a little bit easier for me to come up with a coherent system. The second thing to note is there's no easy way to tell what shot I'm seeing currently. So I know this is the wide shot, but if I'm pressing 2, 3, 4, and then I press 4 again, well, now I got to this really strange shot, and I'm not sure how I got to this. This is not one of my 4 main shots. And what happened, if you see something like this where you see a shot you don't really quite understand why it's there, what's happened most likely is that you do not have an active trigger right now, that all of these triggers have been turned off. So because I pressed 4 twice, I was basically saying turn trigger 4 on, okay, now turn it off. And if there's no trigger active, it's going to default to whatever is set here and wherever you are in the timeline. So right now, the shot that I'm seeing is actually what these current values are set to. So if I get rid of all of these, let's change X these all back to where they normally were. And now that's going to kind of be my default. So even if I press 4 twice now, it's going to go back to that wide shot. So it's basically just a sanity check. If you see something, if you see a shot and you're not sure how it came to be, or it's not part of your main shots, it's probably because you don't have any active triggers, and that's why you're seeing whatever is set over here. Now, the panning and zooming that we showed earlier with keyframes, you can turn those into triggers as well. So just like we showed a little bit ago, let's say I wanted to do a quick zoom in. So let's keyframe position X, Y, and zoom. Move 2 seconds over here and then change these slightly where I zoom in a little bit. Let's select all of these, and you can either right click and do ease, or I like to do function F9 is going to automatically turn them just like After Effects. If you're used to the After Effects way of doing things, you can do it this way as well. And that's going to change them all to eased keyframes. And so let's make sure this looks okay. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And while we're at it, let's do a zoom out as well. Now, this would not look good. In a normal recording, you would not want to immediately go from a zoom in to an out. You're going to make the viewer throw up. But I think for the purposes of setting up triggers, we want to make sure that we're kind of starting and ending in the same place. And so by keeping some similar keyframes, that's going to help us a lot. So I'm just going to select these first ones, copy them, paste them over here, Command C, Command V. And now I've got this sequence where I start zooming in and it zooms back out. So now I've got these pieces that I can turn into replays. So let's select the first 2, the zoom in here, and right click those. And we'll say, I'm gonna actually do create replay and trigger from keyframes. You could create a take from them first and then add some blending and stuff like that. I feel like it's just easier to do it this way. So create replay and trigger from keyframes. That's going to add it here and over here. And then the same thing, I'm going to select the second and third set and right click those. So this is my zoom out now, and create replay and trigger from keyframes. Same thing. Okay, so now we've got these 2 things. If I remember correctly, I think this one was the zoom in and this one was zoom out. And we'll add numbers to these. These were not latched by default, so I'm going to select both of them and click latch, and then I'm going to drag them into the swap set here so they're part of my system. Okay, so now when I press, the 5 key, it's going to do the zoom in, and then when I press 6, it's going to zoom out, and it's going to go directly to that point. Now the nice thing is those 5 and 6 are going to work well together because I set the same keyframe that ends the zoom in is the one that starts the zoom out. So that's going to work seamlessly. And then nicely, they end with, this one ends and the other one begins with the same settings as the wide shot. So you can kind of start, and end in, similar places and make the system feel a little bit more coherent. If this was slightly off and then I pressed 1 to go back to wide and it's just a very small change, it's going to look a little unprofessional and amateurish. When you do camera changes, typically you want them to be a little bit bigger, right? You want kind of more drastic changes. If you make a small change like this, that's really not going, that's not going to be enough. That's going to look kind of jittery and not right. So you can package together as few or as many keyframes as you want to create a trigger system. So if you want a long sequence of pans and zooms and close-ups and wide shots and whatever, you can take all of that. So here I've just got some simple close-ups and wide shots that I did for about 30 seconds. I'm going to select them all, right-click them, say create replay and trigger from keyframes. That's going to add it over here. For a longer sequence like this, I probably want to do let replay finish. So it's going to kind of go through this whole sequence. And let's just set this to the 7 key. Latch is fine. And then when I press 7 now, notice the blue line over here is very slowly creeping forward. It says 35 seconds, and it's going to play through that sequence where I'm a close-up now. In a second, I'm going to move to a wide shot and back and forth until this gets through its whole playback sequence. All right, so let's finish showing how this all comes together in the scene. So now I've switched over to scene, Lyndon and robot, double click on that, and that's gonna take you to this full recorded scene with both of these characters. There's no audio, they're not actually singing anything. I think I was just saying 1, 2, 3 in the background and moving my head around while I was recording this. But there's a few nice details that are added here. Basically, the top level here is kind of covering all the same principles that we just learned about. But one interesting thing is if I dig into city street down here, this is the background layer. If I get rid of this, you'll see it all goes away. But in here, I see I've got background, cloud, tree, all of that stuff. So if I double click on city street, this is a separate PSD file that I brought in, and it just has a bunch of independent parts: the tree, the street, cloud 1, cloud 2, and background. And so to the things that I wanted to have a little bit more movement over to get a sense of parallax or to have the clouds move across the sky, all I did was select them and then go down here to behaviors, add a plus, and go to transform. So let's take a close look at the clouds, for example. So I selected, cloud 1 here, and then down here I renamed it by clicking the little menu icon and went to rename behavior. And instead of this being just called transform, I changed it to something that actually made sense, called cloud 1. And it makes sense to do this because this is what's going to show up in your timeline. So you want it to be differentiated from everything else. Otherwise, you're going to see transform, transform, transform 3 or 4 times, and you're not going to be able to make sense of what is happening. So over here in the timeline, I can see I have a row called cloud 1, and all I did was make a keyframe here at the beginning, position X. So I just clicked the stopwatch icon, said where I wanted it to start, and then at the end here, let's click this little next keyframe thing to bring it to the end, actually after the sequence, and I moved it all the way over to the left. And so slowly, as you're playing through this piece, you'll notice the clouds are slowly moving across the sky from left to right. And I could have added, a bunch of extra clouds if I wanted to, as many as I needed to. But for here, I just added 2 just to show a little bit of background motion to make it a little bit more interesting. I could also have birds flying in the sky, the sun moving, a car moving across the street, whatever I want. So that's kind of in addition to the camera system, but it's just something you can add into your scene to give it a little extra life. Now, the real difference comes in the background. So there's these trees and the city skyline and the blue sky and the tree. So notice really closely, if you look really closely as I'm doing this zoom out, the tree is moving at a slightly different rate than everything else. Notice how right here, it's kind of, you can see it's at the bottom of the fence, the edges. And then as I kind of zoom out, it's a little bit above and it moves a little bit lower. So it's a subtle effect, but something like this gives the scene a little bit more dimension. It feels like that tree is a little bit more in the foreground. These characters are in the middle, and then the background is also moving at the same rate. So notice this tree right here that's by kind of this, standing up hair in the back of his head. Look how right now it's starting there, but when I go, down here, it's actually moved up a little bit. And so you can think of it as you move closer to something, like you're walking towards a mountain or something like that, that mountain seems to go up a little bit higher, right? It looks like it's getting bigger. It's becoming, a little bit wider and taller as you get close to it. So and I get this mixed up all the time. I'm like, is this the right way, or should it scale left or right or up or down? And then I try it, and sometimes I'm completely wrong. But this is a way to kind of add a little bit of extra dimension to your scenes. So if you want to dig into the keyframes and see exactly how I did this, the tree, basically I'm just moving a little bit more down into the left and scaling up a little bit bigger, so it feels like it's moving a little bit faster out of the way of the camera. And then, the background, I said, it kind of moves up and scales up a little bit. So check out what I did here. But again, for me, honestly, it's a trial and error process. Try things out, see what looks good to your eye and what doesn't. You'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly. So that's it. That is a quick look at cameras. I feel like this is a really helpful tool for a lot of people. A lot of the beginner videos that we see, they're one shot, it's one talking head, talking directly to the camera. And I think just adding a little bit of shot variety is immediately going to take your animations, your cartoons to the next level. So try it out, give it a shot. And if you make anything cool with this, we would love to see it. Please use #CharacterAnimator when sharing on social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of that stuff. That's what the team looks at to see all the cool stuff that you're making. And if you have any questions about cameras, if there's things I didn't cover here, or you have some more advanced ideas about how to kind of hack the system and make some really complicated camera rigs and setups, you can go to the official Character Animator forums and share your ideas or ask your questions there. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and have fun.